Hey, what's up, everybody, and welcome to this week's episode of Wake the Future. This week, you get me doing a solo episode. In a technological world, I think one of the things that makes us uniquely human is the ability to look at things practically and with common sense and kind of call balls and strikes, but we have to see things clearly in order to do that. So today I wanted to talk about artificial intelligence in three very specific ways based on things that I'm seeing happening right now in the news. The first is going to be common sense when it comes to the economics of AI. Then I want to talk about the safety and security of AI. And then finally, I want to talk about the leadership component to this. So let's start at the top with number one. I've already done a module on here, and I've also posted videos through social about what I call AI economics for dummies. I see in the news that OpenAI president and co-founder Greg Brockman thinks that as we're moving from a digital economy to what he calls a compute-powered economy, that's going to make what are called solopreneurs much more commonplace. He's basically arguing, and a lot of the people who follow this line of thinking argue, that solopreneurs are going to be empowered. Individual people are going to be empowered to start crazy businesses using the efficiencies of AI, and that we are soon going to see the first billionaire solopreneur who utilizes AI to get to that level. Wall Street Journal reported recently that solo operators earning over $1 million on Stripe have doubled since 2023, and those crossing 10 million have nearly tripled. Now, it's interesting. Those are interesting numbers, and I like them at face value. But when you dig deeper, those aren't giving raw number counts. It's basically saying that the numbers have doubled and tripled. But if we started with, let's say, a few hundred people, and those numbers have doubled or tripled, that doesn't really mean anything in the grand scale of things. So we have to think about the fact that it is increasingly likely, in fact, I think it's an inevitability, that there will become one or even a few billionaires in the next few years who use AI to their advantage to start companies basically of one, solopreneurs. And that's a wonderful thing, and we should herald those people when they do it. But because a few are able to do it does not mean it's going to be commonplace. In fact, I would argue that far less than 0.1% of solo entrepreneurs are going to become even millionaires using this technology in the next 5 or 10 years as sort of the engine. That's not to say the technology is not great, but I think this promise that everyone's going to become an uber wealthy solopreneur is overplayed. And of course, in any situation, the same thinking applies, and we have to put a lens of common sense over this. Who is the messenger here? The messenger is the president and co-founder of one of the most influential AI companies. And so, of course, what are his incentives? Now, he probably believes this. I'm not saying that he doesn't believe this, nor am I saying he's being purposely dishonest. But people who stand to profit the most from these technologies are the ones who are going to promote and pump them in this way. So let's put the brakes on the fact that everyone's going to become an uber wealthy solopreneur. Because in my AI economics for dummies, I talked about the fact that these arguments right here that Greg Brockman is making are based on three faulty assumptions. And these assumptions do not apply equally to most entrepreneurs. One, that everyone has a marketable idea, product, or service. Two, that they are good at selling and marketing and can then market or sell that product, service, or idea. And three, that they're going to have access to unlimited or as much compute power through AI that they need to get to this level. And of course, if you watch the video, the interview with Greg Brockman, something that most people who are supporting this line of thinking glazed over is that early on in the interview, he said, and you have to catch this, that people will be able to do this if they have access basically to unlimited compute. And the funny thing about it is that they will not have access to unlimited compute. In fact, I would argue that most entrepreneurs who are bootstrapped and really are financing themselves with little to no money and might be operating on credit in many cases are going to have to pay a massive premium to access the amount of artificial intelligence they need in the near future. So most entrepreneurs do not have great marketable ideas, products, or services. The majority of people are not good at selling themselves or the things that they're making. And this is not a knock on the average person. It's just to say that coming up with a great new idea and being able to really sell and market things well, that's a skill that only certain people have. Most do not. And finally, the idea that everyone's going to have unlimited compute to be able to do this is a fantasy. It's not going to happen. So the bottom line here, when we apply common sense to the economics of AI, is that when people are telling you that this is going to be the utopian future of artificial intelligence, understand that they are preparing people for what is already happening and will happen, which is a wave of layoffs in the enterprise and corporate space. And then ultimately, they're trying to soften the blow for people and think about the incentives of the messenger. Are these people who are truly objective, like I try to be, and we try to be here at Wake the Future, or are they people who are running AI businesses and stand to gain from promoting this technology to the maximum degree? That's number one. The second area I wanted to cover with all of you today is the future of safety and security of AI. Now, of course, we could have this conversation 6 months from now, a year from now, 5 years from now, and the landscape may change. But where we sit right now, there is this huge debate that's getting a lot of press out there because it's taken over the AI industry. And it's all about whether or not AI development should be what's called open weight or if it should be closed and proprietary. Now, I've said this before. Let me put out a caveat here. I am not an AI expert, nor am I a data scientist or an engineer. So I come at this from the perspective of an outside observer who studies the future. I've studied trends for 25 years, but of course, I'm not in the weeds day to day with the nuances of the technology. So I'm not going to use a lot of lexicon here because I don't want to be over my head. The bottom line is that open weight models of development for AI basically promote the idea that the gatekeepers of artificial intelligence technology, some of the big tech companies that are at the forefront, would release a lot of the specs of the technology they've already developed so that effectively developers out there in the marketplace can then piggyback on that and make tweaks and test and improve and customize things in ways that they see fit or work to their advantage. Now, that sounds fantastic in theory, and almost every single large technology company that is in the AI space is in the open weight camp as of now. The opposite of that is what is called closed or proprietary AI development. And the only two prominent AI companies, and they happen to be two of the biggest, if not the biggest, that support that model are OpenAI and Anthropic. And this is making news right now because there is proposed legislation to do a sweeping ban on open weight development of artificial intelligence. But of course, most people in the AI space, most of the people who stand to make money in the AI space, and many of the commenters I've seen online are going all in on this idea of open weight, because what they say is that we should not trust a couple of huge megalithic companies in the AI space to be the gatekeepers of this technology and to basically keep it in a black box. And of course, I would agree with that. If taken as a standalone fact and reality, I would agree that I wouldn't necessarily trust the motives of the founders and developers at OpenAI or Anthropic more than I would trust anybody else. And in fact, I've said before, because of incentives, we have a reason to at least partially distrust them until proven otherwise. But here's the problem. Artificial intelligence, the way that it's going right now and the way that it is projected, the best case scenario is that it is going to solve many of the world's intractable problems. And I truly believe that that's the case. I truly believe that artificial intelligence is going to solve many of our engineering problems, our genetic problems, our medical and health problems, environmental problems. It's going to be such a wonderful discovery and exploratory tool. But on the flip side to that, if we think about a nightmare scenario, which is plausible, it is that we can have almost a civilization collapsing or catastrophic event caused directly by AI. Once it becomes not necessarily sentient, but once it breaks free from the parameters that we have given it, and it decides it wants to do something autonomously that is nefarious, or if a bad actor out there decides to take really advanced AI and use it to their ends, geopolitically or in mass cyber attacks, whatever it might be, we could have a nightmare scenario. Now, I'm not saying that is going to happen, but it is definitely plausible. So whenever we think about risk in these situations and we have these debates, we have to assume the worst and then build up from there. So here's the thing. This open weight argument basically says that all of the innovation around AI is going to take place much more freely and in a much better way if we let everyone kind of tinker with it. And we should not trust these couple of big companies over here to just hold everything in a black box. But here's the flip side. The flip side is that if we allow people more unfettered access to this technology, it can get in the wrong hands and terrible things can happen. And of course, people are talking about this in the context of the US versus China and vice versa. But we also have to think about what happens when an individual, sophisticated actor decides they want to wreak havoc on something or someone or society. We have to be very careful about this. So even though this is antithetical to how I go about things in other areas, I actually tend to be more right now in the cautious, closed, proprietary camp. Because think about some comparisons here. When vaccines are being developed for dangerous diseases, you had the fast tracking of vaccines during COVID. And a lot of people during and since then have proved skeptical of those vaccines. And there are major arguments to be had about whether or not those vaccines worked and whether or not they had side effects. And the reason that conversation is salient is because those vaccines were fast tracked at about 10 to 20 times the speed that we normally see vaccines introduced. Now, would we normally just roll experimental vaccines out to the marketplace and have everyday people tinker with them and see if they can improve them themselves? Of course not, because we could end up with a public health crisis. Think about all of the innovations that come out of our military R&D sector. So DARPA, from the Department of Defense, has developed behind closed doors some of the most innovative technologies of the last 50 years. Many of the things which once perfected have then been rolled into consumer technologies. Would we take very sensitive defense-focused technologies that are being operated on or engineered behind closed doors and roll them out to the general public to tinker with before they've been perfected or safeguarded? Of course we wouldn't. So why are we going to do something different with artificial intelligence? It makes absolutely no sense, and we have to apply common sense here. And the reason why people are arguing en masse for an open weight model is not because they necessarily think it's just going to be that much better, but because, again, question what their incentives are. Anyone who stands to make money in this space or thinks they can make significant money in this space is going to look at this through that colored lens, even if their intentions in their own mind are pure. So I would say we have to look at this debate much more carefully. I tend to actually side here with the perspective right now of OpenAI and Anthropic, but of course, I can be swayed based on the evidence and based on how things change, and we can revisit this conversation in 6 months or a year. And then finally, the third component of this, which is one that I'm going to talk a lot more about in the coming months, is the leadership component of this. Now, leadership is a tired category. Everyone talks about leadership. There are a bazillion books about leadership. I don't usually like to tread in this space because it gets so cliche. But I will say that leadership, when it comes to investing in and pursuing AI initiatives, is something we have to talk about here. I saw a story recently about how AI could trigger a layoff trap that even smart CEOs can't escape. Two researchers, Jerry Tsoukalos and Brett Falk, were the authors of the AI Layoff Trap, which was a research paper recently published by the Wharton School. And it said that CEOs can become trapped in a race to automate that erodes consumer spending on which their businesses depend. So what's really interesting about this is that this is actually portending a current reality in a near future where we see so many CEOs and heads of businesses out there, not necessarily all of them, but most of them, feeling the pressure to automate and show that they are investing in AI and staying contemporary. Now, of course, it's very easy to succumb to the pressure, the marketplace pressure and the stakeholder pressure to invest in AI because that's what everyone is doing right now. And it's also easy to go with the crowd because then this way, if things go well, everyone does well. If things go poorly, everyone does poorly. It's a much safer mindset to just automate because the pressure and the marketplace indicators right now suggest you should automate. But what too many companies are finding out are the following. Number one, if you make major investments in AI and AI infrastructure without tying it directly to clear strategies, oftentimes you end up with worse results than you started with because you're operating aimlessly. You're just investing in a technology. Number two is that people, in many cases, have prematurely laid off human workers, thinking that they had to automate and streamline immediately. And they're finding out that they actually have to start rehiring those human workers. I saw another story recently which suggested that scores of companies out there, hundreds, thousands of companies, are starting to hire some people back in a game of what we call musical chairs. So chairs were pulled and now they're being added back, at least temporarily. Now those jobs may not look exactly like they looked a year ago or 2 years ago, but people are being rehired at least temporarily because there was a premature investment or overinvestment in AI without thinking it through. Now, what this story and what this research paper suggests is that in automating too quickly, a lot of these businesses are basically cutting off their nose to spite their face. They are unemploying individuals, and if you multiply that by thousands of companies, who basically are the lifeline to their business as consumers. And so what ends up happening is even if an individual CEO who's pretty smart says this is not necessarily a good idea, they succumb to the pressure of automation because they have to keep up with the competitive landscape of which they're operating in. So they're all doing it. And now they're all going to end up in a lot of trouble in the near future. And this talks about the possibility of a bubble or a crash that would make previous bubbles or crashes look mild in comparison. Now, I'm not predicting right here that we are going to see a complete bubble burst that's going to be catastrophic. But what this basically indicates to me is that we are suffering from a leadership crisis right now. And it is not necessarily unique to this moment, but I think AI is an inflection point that shines a particularly bright light on this. And here's what I mean by that. I see very few examples in the media and in the marketplace, at least that have come across my filter, of prominent leaders of companies or CEOs basically saying, I am not going to do what everyone else is doing here. And that's unfortunate because there seems to be safety in numbers. And historically, the best leaders, the best CEOs, the most visionary ones are the ones who are willing to zig when everyone else is zagging. I'm not saying to purposely do something you think is wrong just to buck a trend, but you have to start thinking much more specifically about the individual factors that affect your company, your workforce, and your consumer marketplace. So just because everyone is doing something a certain way, or just because you have loud stakeholders that are yelling in your ear, doesn't mean you have to do it that way. I think in the near future, we are going to see, or we have to see at least, a resurgence of bold, individual, charismatic leadership. People who are visionary and say, I'm not exactly going to take this same path to the left that everyone else is taking. I'm going to veer right. If you project that out, if you see leaders who make those types of decisions, yes, if they fail, they can fail spectacularly and they can crash and burn and they can lose their jobs. And if they succeed, they stand to win spectacularly, stand out from all of their competitors, and win the day in their sector, whatever sector that happens to be. So I think we need to see more leaders stepping forward and saying, you know what, I have a different vision. It doesn't mean that I'm not going to go away, for example, from investing largely in artificial intelligence, but I have to do it a different way, or I have to do it on a different time cycle. And I have to be able to communicate that to my stakeholders and tie it together with the vision of the business. We need to see more of that. We've seen it in the past. We know who some of those visionary leaders were. We need a new generation of them now. We have to get away from a lot of this generic, fully data-driven MBA or engineer style thinking. And I think in the next year or so, you're going to hear many more people talking about this on stages and at events where leadership is at the center. So those are the three things I think we need to talk about, certainly with a lens of common sense. I encourage all of you to drop comments below, like, subscribe, follow. Please go to our new website, wakethefuture.com, sign up for our newsletter, and we'll see you next week.
If you enjoyed today's conversation, like, follow, and subscribe to stay ahead of what's next. I'm Erica Orange.
And I'm Jared Weiner. Thanks for waking the future with us. We'll see you next time.